My name is Joe Rossi, and welcome to the first pre-disaster outreach that our coalitions have done, at least the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition has ever done. This coalition was, or this outreach was really, the goal of it was really to make sure that people were aware of what to do before events. You know, the focus for the last 50 years of the flood insurance program has typically been to recover after an event, but we want to make sure you know what to do before the event. This was really part of what happened after the storms this spring, where we went into communities all across the state and found major issues that happen the minutes, hours, days after an event where we can't be there to hold the hand of every single person. So we wanted to make sure that we address those issues ahead of time. So in today's presentation, we're going to talk about pre-storm preparations. We're going to talk about claims. We're going to talk about coverages within the flood policy, some substantial damage and substantial improvement definitions, program changes that are coming. There's a big deadline at the end of November we'll talk about. And then funding. You know, that was the big thing that we wanted to make sure that people knew after the events had happened this spring, was that once something happens, what are your financial resources available to you to recover? And that is something that we really want to focus on. We have experts here today to talk about that. So we're going to move some things around because we do have some guests here that will want to update some of the stuff going on in our local community here in Scituate. Before I do, I have a very brief introduction to something new that the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition is very proud to announce here for the very first time. We are proud to announce that we have officially released the No Flood suite of products for people to finally understand their risk. So the reason that we're breaking this out tonight is because the information that these products bring you will help you better understand your flood risk and have you better prepared for storms. So that includes the No Flood Determination, the No Flood Elevation Certificate, and the No Flood Letter of Map Amendment. Now, how do you access these products? Well, one of the great features that we've recently released on our website is we have put every single flood map in the entire country online digitally for you to access. You go to our homepage, you go to that bar at the bottom, you search an address. Once you search the address, a box pops up, you click the product in that box, and you're brought to an ordering portal. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of these products, and we'll refer back to these as we go through the night, and to make sure that you're aware of how to get some of that risk information into your hands. So with that, we're going to move on to the next part of the program. We're going to move things around a little bit. I want to make sure I brought up here Brad Washburn, who is the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Scituate, and Kyle, I don't know if you want to come up later or now, it's up to you. Kyle Boyd, who's the Coastal Resource Officer for Scituate, to talk a little bit about what the town of Scituate is doing before the events, during the events, after the events. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I had prepared nothing. I didn't really plan on speaking tonight, so I'm just going to shoot from the hip. So I'm Brad Washburn, Planning and Development Director for the town of Scituate, and with me tonight is Kyle Boyd, our new Coastal Management Officer. So Joe, I've never actually been on one of your meetings here, so I don't know exactly what you typically cover, but I can tell you what the town has done in the recent past in regards to both planning, projects, some kind of on-the-ground measures to address proactively address flooding. So as many of you in this room may know, the town of Scituate has received a number of coastal resiliency grants from the State Office of Coastal Zone Management. And those grants have specifically focused on a few areas. We have one for Humrock to design a dune nourishment roadway elevation project, again to reduce flooding in that neighborhood. That's still in the, I'd say, planning phases. We're trying to work with property owners to get the necessary easements so that we can move forward that project forward to permitting and then seek funding. Another grant project that we received was for North Scituate, Minot Beach. In that area, again, we got design money, engineering money through our that grant program to design a beach nourishment project. Again, the idea is there to build the beach back up in front of the seawall to reduce flooding and coastal storm-related impacts there. We also have in 2016 another coastal resiliency grant. We received funding to prepare a town-wide, it's a very long name, but it's essentially engineering recommendations for each stretch of shoreline. It goes through a series of alternatives for each location. It goes through all the gamut of kind of options, increasing seawalls, providing amendments, beach nourishment. Again, so for each section it has preferred alternatives. Again, this is just a plan. None of this has been funded as of yet, but it's kind of our strategies for shoreline protection. That's kind of the, I guess, grant-funded activities we've done to date. I think what we'd like to do moving forward, again, I think we've done a lot of specific engineering-oriented studies. I think what we'd like to do moving forward is a kind of public process to pull all of those studies together, prioritize those actions, and figure out funding strategies as well. So I think more to come on that. And I think, again, look forward to a public process that will tie all of those recommendations together and all those studies together. Again, we're not necessarily wed to any previous work, but I think we have a lot of good stuff that we've done in the past that we can use to move forward. On the ground, so that's kind of at the planning level. On the ground, the town continues on a number of fronts. We have several homes that are currently in the home elevation grant program. We have, again, both Kyle and I kind of walked into this line. So we have a number of homes that have been funded from previous storm events that we're working, getting them through the process, getting the necessary information, FEMA, MEMA, et cetera, so that they can elevate their homes and get out of harm's way. We are continuing to work on, it was, I think, a little over a year ago, the town of Scituate, Marshfield, and Duxbury agreed to enter a letter of map revision process together. This is where they were proposing amendments to flood maps. We recently asked to be withdrawn from the joint application because we didn't, we had issued with some of the recommendations for Scituate. So where we are now is working with our partners at the Coastal Coalition, Coastal Advisory Commission, Board of Selectmen, and others, and eventually back out to the public to kind of vet these proposed changes a little bit more and decide how we want to move forward. Again, our goal is to have the most accurate information on those flood maps so that folks can adequately prepare for future flood events. Can you think of anything else? That's kind of all I can rattle off the top of my head.
Yeah, so I'm Kyle Boyd, the new coastal management officer. So I've been working for the town for a little over a month, and I have been able to determine that it does indeed flood in Scituate. On top of Brad just did a great job of giving a summary. I actually was expecting to give it, so thank you for taking that. And thank you, Joe, for hosting this. This is a great event. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's...
Put your mic up higher.
Yeah, so the only other thing that I would like to add is that, through the CAC, as well as like my first month for the town, I've been able to realize that there's a lot of plans, there's a lot of studies, and they're very comprehensive, and they have a lot of depth and weight. And even for me coming in, it's kind of challenging to be able to just absorb all of that. So what we're trying to do, myself, Brad, in conjunction with the CAC, is take all of that information and make it easier for the average homeowner to digest. So basically we can summarize this stuff and put it on our website so that anyone going on the town website can easier understand the coast of Scituate, where to get, flood data, insurance data, basically everything. So that's a little more cleaned up. And I think other than that, Brad,
Sorry, I'm a little scatterbrained, still on the antibiotics, so I'm trying to remember. One of the things just came to my mind, we recently received a grant from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs It's what's called a planning assistance grant. And in that grant, we'll be focusing on long-term resiliency options for Scituate Harbor, which our previous studies that we just mentioned had not focused on. They focused on our foreshore protection in all our other sections of town. So this grant will allow us to focus on what's going on in the harbor, what can we do long-term to make that more resilient, and also recommend, or help us to recommend potential zoning changes for that area as well.
All right. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. All right. Great information on what our communities are doing. You know, every once in a while I like to have a little fun because I make mistakes all the time. And Doris Creary made it very clear that I made a glaring spelling mistake in one of the slides earlier. And yes, these are not suits, these are suites of products. So thank you, Doris. And that's what happens when I put together a presentation at 1 in the morning. So we're going to move on now. And we're going to have Dave Ball from the Scituate Coastal Coalition come up and present on what to do to prepare yourself, your structure, your physical structure, and yourself from a storm before it happens. So Dave, come on up. I don't think you need this, do you?
I hope not.
All right.
Hey everybody. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Sure. Well, welcome to the meeting tonight. Joe, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and go up to the back table and bring down one of those OK health cards if you could.
All right.
I got it.
So,
I got it.
somebody else. Well, the town of Scituate does an excellent job, in my opinion, in preparing people for upcoming storms. If you go to the town website, Town of Scituate, right across the top there's a menu bar, and you click on Storm Emergency Preparedness is what it's called, Emergency Preparedness. And within that bunch of information, there are a number of different very important pieces of information. About a year and a half ago, I guess it was, the fire chief decided to have a link within that where people could click on it, and it's essentially a place where you would indicate to the fire department that you were evacuating your home prior to an upcoming storm. And the reason that that's important is that if you have a major storm, and then there are people calling about you, or relatives out in Colorado, for example. Is my uncle okay? Well, where does he live? He lives down in Oceanside Drive, or he lives in Hummerock, or he lives in Cedar Point, or he lives in Scituate. If they have information that you have evacuated, then they can tell that person right away, there's no problem, they're safe, and they're up at the shelter at the high school. So that's just one little piece of information that you can go on to, and that is a big help for the emergency management people. Another thing it does is that it allows them to know which houses are occupied potentially and which ones are not. So that's just one piece of the information that that the fire department and the emergency management people have available to you. Another thing that's been going on in the past, not just in Scituate, but nationwide, people have been reluctant to leave their homes during an upcoming storm if they have dogs and cats and other pets. The Scituate Animal Shelter does a great job of making sure that you can take your pet to the animal shelter, or if they're full, they have other places they can temporarily shelter them. Because generally speaking, the town shelter, the high school, does not, I don't believe, take pets, generally speaking. And that's big, because in the past people have refused to leave, and that has happened as recently as a couple of the hurricanes that we had down south this year. So, County Scituate, emergency management, very important. Working with the fire chief, the Scituate Coastal Coalition has come up with these cards, okay and help. This was something that the fire department requested that the Scituate Coastal Coalition provide to all of the coastal residents. So the idea is, after a storm, when they're going through neighborhoods, checking on houses and checking on people, if they see this in the front window facing the street, they know that there's no problem there. This would be an alarming situation to see, but they would need to know it. So there are some of these up on the back table if you'd like to take them. So that's pretty important. One of the programs that we have developed from the Scituate Coastal Coalition, and we weren't the organization that came up with the idea. We copied it, frankly, from something that happened up on the West Coast. It's called Map Your Neighborhood. And that's not the one I was looking for. They're on the back table. Map Your Neighborhood. Could somebody bring one of those down to me? It should be titled right on the front, Map Your Neighborhood. Not for shore protection.
All I have is nope, all I have is foreshore protection.
There's no mapping. Doris, are there any on your table?
Not mapping.
Well, Map Your Neighborhood is something I consider to be incredibly important. What it is a way to take an inventory of everybody that is in your neighborhood. Were there many others?
Yeah.
Okay.
They just got one.
It looks like this.
Yes, we
Map
do.
Your Neighborhood,
We use the
neighborhood
neighborhood.
disaster readiness. It's a simple thing to run as long as we have somebody willing to spend a little bit of time gathering up the information. Basically what you have to do is get the name and the address and the email and cell phone numbers and landline numbers of everybody that's in your area. Then it's possible to send out emails to everybody on that list so that everybody in your neighborhood is alerted to information that, you know, the Scituate Coastal Coalition wants to put out to you, or the National Weather Service, or the town of Scituate. And this little booklet explains the program. I'm hoping somebody can take it. It also has a little diagram of how you should go about turning your gas meter off if you ever got into that kind of a situation. It's not recommended you do that unless it's something pretty serious coming before you. Because once you shut your gas off, by the way, you cannot turn it back on yourself. You have to have a gas company do that. But in a true emergency, everybody should know how to shut off their gas meter. So, Map Your Neighborhood is really important. You can take that a step further. This is the emergency plan that we've put together for my neighborhood, which is out on Cedar Point, the neighborhood around the lighthouse. We have a map here of the areas where it's particularly vulnerable to flooding. We highlight phone numbers of utilities, emergency services. Code Red, it's right up at the top here. Code Red is really important. It's run by Plymouth County. And if you sign up for that, you will get text messages, phone calls, however you sign up to get those messages. And then you will be notified for an upcoming storm. In Scituate, we've been very fortunate to have the head meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Norton, was Taunton, now it's Norton, contact us. Contacts me, contacts the fire chief, contacts a couple of other people at the Coastal Coalition, and will give us a heads up of what to expect in an upcoming storm. For example, in the storm last March, I got an email from Bob Thompson saying, just be aware that the tide that you're going to be looking at in and the storm surge might be approaching what you experienced during the Halloween storm in 1991. So that information was sent out through everybody in the Coastal Coalition. And by the way, there are 10 beach associations in the town. And then I'm looking at Bill Graham right here, and Kathy Joyce, Rosemary Dobie right here. They're all members of various beach associations. They have the ability to send out that information to all of their members. So we can reach within a matter of minutes over 2,000 coastal residents. Information is very, very important. So I want to show you something that might work for you, not for everybody, but it might work in some situations. I don't have any skin in the game with this whole thing. But this is a storm bracket. I used them on the house that I had when I had the house on the water. And I had that house from the 78 storm in 91 up through the early 2000s. So the idea is this bolts to the casing of the window on the outside. And it's a track. It has a plate in the bottom, so nothing goes through it that way. Then, what you do, you have 2x4s, 2x6s, or 2x8s, whatever you decide you want to use. You drop them down, and it goes across the door or the window. I found it to be a very good, fairly inexpensive system to use because, let's say you have a window that's this much across, about 6 feet. Every 2x6 will flex a little bit differently. It's not stiff, so it'll flex a little bit. So when a wave hits, it flexes, but it doesn't snap and break. The other nice thing about using this kind of a system is that if you are late starting to board up and you're trying to put up plywood, it's disastrous because the plywood acts like a big sail. You can't do it. It's impossible. So by having this kind of a system, you can still, at the last minute, hopefully drop these down in place. There's a local company in Scituate that can make these brackets. Stevenman Machine, Tilden Road. And he can make them either out of this steel or stainless steel. And they can be painted whatever the casing color is on the house. If you want to look at these later, you can. And let's see what else I want to talk to you about. On the back table, there is, this goes back a few years, I just pulled them out, Scituate Coastal Coalition, membership and emergency contact information. This is the form that is used to take the inventory of everybody living in your neighborhood. Very useful. Scituate Coastal Coalition has a website, ScituateCoastalCoalition.org. We have links to the National Weather Service, to the Boston buoy off Boston Harbor. All these links are very informational in terms of what's going on as the storm approaches. I use it all the time. For example, the Boston buoy, about 16 miles out at sea, will tell you how high the tide, or not the tide, but the wave heights are up there, the wind direction. You can go onto the Boston tide gauge. Boston tide gauge, run by NOAA, updates every 6 minutes. So you can see, and you can kind of extrapolate between low tide and high tide, or any time in between, how high that tide might be. There's the rule of 12ths. I always mention this, but I don't know that I'm getting it across very well. The rule of 12ths says this. If you're going to have a 12-foot tide, between low tide and high tide, the tide's going to rise 12 feet, which is kind of common during a major storm. The tide height will go up 1 foot in the first hour, 2 feet in the second hour, 3 feet in the third and fourth hour, and then 2 feet in the 5th and 1 foot in the last hour. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Now, the reason that's important is what I'm actually saying is that the tide goes up half of its height at the midpoint of the tide. A lot of people get stuck at their house because they're looking out the window. I wonder how bad it's going to be. It's half tide. You know, maybe I'll be able to get through it. And then all of a sudden, they have half of that tide height coming in a couple hours around the midpoint of the tide. So, we always tell people, if you're going to evacuate, you have to do it no later than half tide, or 3 hours before the high tide. If you wait for the 4th or 5th hour, you're going to get yourself in big trouble. It's something that we emphasize over and over and over. One last thing. Everybody likes to get free stuff. So, in my neighborhood, we have these car stickers. This one says, Resident Cedar Point Association. It's got an image of a lighthouse. The idea is this. The town of Scituate sometimes will close the roads after a storm. There's debris around. They don't want the tourists going down to the beaches. So they close down the road. So, you pull up to a car. You say, I'm a resident out on ABC Street, down in Minot. And the Minot Beach Association might have some image. Maybe they have an image of Minot Light or something. It helps the cop understand right away, okay, this guy's legit. He's not going to be trying to get down there as a tourist. He has business to be done, and they'll let you through. And it has worked pretty well. The other thing I'd like to say is the fire chief in Scituate, being the emergency director of emergency planning, and I've talked to him many times about this, has done a really good job of letting people back into their homes as soon as possible. I see another neighbor of mine here, Joe Burke, and he's nodding his head yes. That's important because if people feel that they're not going to be able to get back to their homes as soon as possible after a storm, they're going to tend not to leave in the first place. So, all of these things are just little suggestions, and I'm done. Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you,
Dave,
Dave.
can I just add something to the Mappy neighborhood?
Yeah.
The other advantage of the thing is, there's a question on here that says, do you have any medical issues? Do you have any special medical equipment, such as oxygen? Are you on a respirator? Anything like that? Do you have any mobility issues? Are you in a wheelchair? Do you have a walker? Whatever. All this information is listed on this form, and it's forwarded to the fire chief, who keeps them on file. And it helps them, if they need to rescue somebody, they can say, Joe Jones, who lives at 10 Smith Road, is in a wheelchair. So it's extremely helpful to them because they're not going by this house not knowing that there's somebody in there that can't get out because maybe they can't walk, or maybe they're stuck in a wheelchair. Maybe they're on a respirator and they need oxygen or whatever. So those forms are extremely important and extremely helpful to the fire department.
Kathy, I'm glad you brought that up. It's right here. I'm pointing to it right here in the form. The other thing to be aware of, if we turn in that kind of information, it goes to the fire chief.
It's confidential.
And he keeps it confidential in his office. Nobody at town hall sees it.
Right.
So there are people that are concerned, well, if I give this information out, who in the whole world is going to see it? Well, only the Scituate fire chief. Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. All right, great. Now we come to the part of the presentation where we start to talk all about flood. All right. So there's obviously a lot of hazards when it comes to living on or near a coast or coastline. And we think of our coast and living on the coast, on the houses that are directly on the water, but we know that they are not the ones that are always the ones that are most affected. Obviously, nor'easters caused most of the flood hazards in Marshfield, Scituate, Duxbury, Hull, Quincy, all along our South Shore, and as Doris, myself, and my board of directors on the MCC know from our experience in the spring, the North Shore gets also devastated by these storms. Well, it's interesting, a hurricane may last for hours depending on its movement. We know that hasn't necessarily been the case this last year with Harvey and Florence. But nor'easters may last for days. Typically, a real nor'easter is a day and a half if you add it all up total. So know your flood risk. Again, we talked about on our website, we now have the ability for you to identify the zone that you're in easily, find out your risk, check the maps located online. Your library or planning department has some other flood risk information, and contact your insurance agent. So we're going to talk about flood insurance a little later and its coverages, but let's talk about what flood insurance actually is and how you can get it. So FEMA estimates that 40% of losses come from low-risk flood zones. Anyone know what a low-risk flood zone is? It's either no flood zone at all, or no mapped flood zone, I should say. Everyone's in a flood zone. Or it is a shaded X zone, so it's usually an orange color on the flood map. So those are the two areas that are considered low risk. So 40% of losses. I think if we look at Hurricane Harvey, that number was around 60 to 80%. So that's a big number. And your homeowner's insurance, I cannot reiterate this enough, will not cover property or building damage from a flood. Flood coverage can be purchased from either the federal government or a private insurer. So we're seeing private insurance take a real strong hold in our country right now. The latest numbers were the NFIP has 5.1 million flood policies. That number is up by about 200,000 over the last year. Private flood insurance has about 600,000 policies. That's up 40% from last year. So private flood is moving. Flood coverage, a separate policy, we talked about this, is different. You need a different one than homeowners. Contents-only insurance is available for renters. So if you're a renter or know a renter, they can get a contents-only policy covered for flood. For most flood policies, whether you're in the private market or the NFIP, have anywhere from a 15-day to a 30-day wait. Now, what's really interesting is this little blue bar at the bottom, and let me see if I can highlight this. So the average disaster assistance during Harvey, the average disaster assistance was a $6,000 payout. The average flood insurance was a $106 payout. It's a little bit of a difference. So if you're going to rely on disaster assistance to be what gets you whole after a flood, I wouldn't count on that. And flood insurance, believe it or not, can actually be cheap. So the average national policy, this number has changed just a bit. 950, FEMA updates their average annual policy every year in terms of what the average policy costs. I believe we're at $1,000 or about $1,100 right now. So about $950 to $1,100 is your average flood insurance policy. So what's interesting is there is a 26% chance you will be flooded during a 30-year mortgage and a 9% chance of a fire. And that comes from the Insurance Information Institute. 30% of flood, we talked about that, 30 to 40% of flood claims come from low risk flood zones, which, like we said, are the CB and X zones, which are either the shaded or non-shaded areas on the map, the orange shaded areas. And then a preferred risk policy, if you're not in one of those shaded areas at all, shaded, well, you can even get it in a shaded X zone. If you're not in the shaded areas at all on the flood maps, again, we're referring to where you are on the flood maps, your policy is as low as, even lower than $499. That's actually the max it would cost for $250,000 of coverage. So you want to talk to your insurance agent about that. And CRS, we have a guide for realtors in Marshfield, which is going to be widely available once our CRS website is available. So Dave really already talked a lot about what we're going to go over here, so we're going to breeze through this. Check the maps. I said we would refer to our site later in the program. There it is again, noflood.org. You'll see the website at the end of the presentation. You go there. This is, when you go to the website, that is the home screen. We made it super easy to find. So you don't even have to search. You go there, it is a searchable map, it will ping your location, you will find your flood risk information, and then if you need additional info, you can go there and actually order some products. By the way, we are a 501c3, so your product, once it's purchased, ends up giving us a percentage of that comes to us as a charitable donation. So prepare for the storm, so check your flood hazard. First thing is, regardless of how people feel about the accuracy of FEMA flood maps, which is a long discussion and we could have a whole presentation on. The point is that the risk information available to you are the flood maps. So you've got to be able to identify where you are on the map. And complete an inventory of your personal property. This is one of the things that we saw in the spring that was not done. Take an inventory of your current belongings now while there's no damage to them. I cannot tell you how many times after an event, and this is what we were talking earlier about not being able to hold the hands of people in the days and weeks after a flood. What happens is somebody has a flood, they got personal property or building damage, and they repair it. And the adjuster comes out a week later, and believe it or not, they've already replaced the electric baseboards or maybe a dishwasher or a dryer that they needed right away, and there's no inventory of what it looks like beforehand. And so there's issues when it comes to flood claims. Keep insurance documents in a safe place, or keep them digitally, and that's what we're seeing more and more of. Board up windows and doors, Dave. That's a great, interesting. There's many ways to do it, but as Dave said, and Scituate Coastal Coalition certainly has the experience here to know the type of how to.
Joe, can I jump in?
Sure, go right ahead.
The one thing I was going to mention, I was just playing around with some numbers before I came over here tonight. There are many times when a person boards up, it's not a very effective job, and they lose a window. And then the spray from the wave starts coming in. So I was just playing around with some numbers. Let's say you have a window that's broken from a wave, and then the spray, not blasting, but let's say 25 gallons of water comes through each time the wave hits the house. Well, the wave comes in roughly at every 10 seconds. So over a 4-hour, let's say it's 25 gallons coming into the house every time the wave hits, the splashing, that kind of thing. 25 gallons every time. That totals up. If that happens over a 4-hour period of time, 36,000 gallons of water coming into your house. That's going to ruin your day. So that's why it's so important to have good shutters.
Well, and Dave, that's a great point. We talked about those buildings that may not be directly coastal. Those waves turn into sheet flow behind.
That's right.
So we have areas with standing water that can do just the equal amount of damage as a wave spray. So that's a great point. Now, Dave asked me also, and this is really good. I'm glad Dave asked, because a lot of communities have the same ability. Scituate has the maps also just for Scituate on their website. There's a little bit more localized information, such as property info about your particular building on the Scituate website. That's how you get there. So, prepare for a storm. Dave covered a lot of this, right? Shut your gas off, know how to, no, not shut it off, but know how to shut your gas and electricity off. Move hazardous materials out of basements, sheds, or other areas that may flood. Elevate your building. So these are kind of like short-term things versus long-term things. So this can be done with funds from ICC and federal grants, and we're going to talk about that a little later in our funding section. Okay, we already said make household inventory of contents. Get a copy of Repairing Your Flooded Home. Now, this presentation is geared towards our CRS program in Marshfield, where myself, Doris, and Tim Williams on our board here, and you'll meet them all a little later. We chair the Marshfield CRS committee, or we run that committee. So we have some guides available, and so does Scituate as being part of CRS. We all have similar guides. Do we have anyone here from Hull? No? Quincy? Quincy? Okay. So Quincy's in CRS, I believe. Scituate, Marshfield. Any other communities other than Quincy, Marshfield, Scituate? Okay. All right, good. So we know that we are talking the same language then when we say CRS, and these should be available in those communities. This is kind of a cool graphic I found a while back. It's from the Red Cross. Is make an emergency checklist. I mean, you literally can. This presentation will be online in the coming days. Take this slide, print it out, and make that your checklist. storm documentation. This is critically important. This is not something that we have really pushed before. It's something that the communities have pushed. I know Scituate has in the past, Marshfield, and all the communities up and down the South Shore. I took this picture actually. I'm not on a boat either. That's standing in the backyard of someone's house. The ice, yeah, that was during the March storm. You're looking at what is normally a marsh. Even if a claim is not filed, you should document storm damage. And we're not talking about your individual property. We're also talking about the area around your property. Why? Because photos and description of damage from a storm can help the community officials. There's so much outpouring after a major event. I mean, think about the March storms, right? Everyone's coming to the town saying, oh, what are we going to do? Our seawalls, our beaches, our lands is missing and damaged. Well, the only way those communities get public assistance from FEMA is if they have a way of saying this was the pre-damage condition, so this is how we're going to get funding after the storm. So having documentation of that pre-damage or immediately after that post-damage condition is extremely important to have. And sometimes the town just doesn't know where to look, and that's where us as community members of that community need to go. Is to be that outlet for the communities to be able to get those funds. Okay, so after a storm, this is also kind of a cool graphic that FEMA's been doing a much better job about visualizing a lot of these procedures. So we've been including as many of them as we can. Listen to local officials. Now, you imagine the events we had in March. That was a pretty bad event, and local officials were blocking off roads and telling people where they could or couldn't go. But then think about an event like what happened down in Mexico Beach, Florida. Okay, that's an event where not only are you listening to the local officials, you're listening to the federal and state officials as well that are coming into those communities and telling you where you can and cannot go. So listen to the local officials for updates and instructions. That's very important. I remember one event, I was actually, I came back to Scituate right on the beach to look at a property, and there were down lines. Now, I didn't know whether those lines were live or not. I certainly didn't go anywhere near those lines, but that's a perfect example of why the community is shutting those areas down and telling you not to go there. And look at that, it says watch out for debris and down power lines. Exactly. Stay out of damaged buildings. I'm a terrible example of that because after the storm, I'm there underneath a deck that's half collapsed taking pictures for my file. So don't do what I do. Don't go near damaged buildings. And then photograph the damage to your property. So these are all the things that we're really kind of summarizing here. These are all the things after a storm, you're right in the moments after a storm, you're just getting back to your property. These are the things you really, and then this is a really good graphic because it's telling you what to do before, during, and this is small, again, this is going to be available after the event online, but we wanted to include a graphic that basically told you in one graphic, this is what you should be doing today, and then during, and then right after. And it was funny because I was joking with my committee that this event should have been called the During Disaster presentation since we have a storm coming tonight. So it's fitting that, before the event, then there's during the event, and then there's right after the event. So what's more important than protecting your building is protecting yourself. So flooding events don't only cause damage to property, but they will threaten your life as well. That's why, when I see people driving through the flooded streets, did anyone see that video online of the school bus that tried to cross the flooded street in Florida or Texas? I think it was. Dorsey saw it, Bill saw it. And it got like halfway through and the water just carried it right down the river. No one was, I don't think there were any kids on it, but the bus driver was fired. Nor'easter and hurricane warnings provide time. So one of the cool things we have here in New England is we have low, moderate, or high risk warnings that the channels, the local access, or not local access, but the news media puts out. So those are important. And then listen to emergency instructions. Dave mentioned the reverse 911, the code red. I believe you're auto signed up for landlines, but you've got to sign up cell phones, I think is how it works. So if you've got a cell phone, you get your information to sign up. And then refill needed prescriptions. We all assume that when we have these events, A couple days might go by and you can get back into your property, but that is not always going to be the case. We increasingly, in all of our South Shore, North Shore, Cape Cod communities, have areas of town that may end up getting cut off at some point, and you may not be able to get back to your structure for weeks. So make sure that you know that you've got to, when you get out, you've got to get out or stay in with everything you need. Check battery-powered equipment. I mean, a lot of these things are common sense, but, you know, fuel your car. And, you know, I should have put a bullet in here, is go buy the milk and bread, because that seems to be what everyone does right before the storm. And then, you know, I really cannot reiterate what Dave mentioned earlier about boarding up your windows. You know, if anyone saw the article that came out about this a couple weeks ago on the Ledger, I told a brief story about an individual who I had talked to, new to the town of one of the local communities, I think it was Scituate, who was right on the water, rental property right on the water, who didn't know that in October was when you should at least start thinking about boarding up your property. You know, Doris Prairie in the back, I've ridden out probably nor'easters I shouldn't have ridden out in coastal properties, and I know that if the windows are not boarded up, that's the end of your structure. I mean, there's just no way, and Doris has been in those situations where the windows weren't boarded up, one went, two went, structure ends up, it is gone. So boarding up, securely boarding up those windows is critical. I cannot emphasize that enough. And 10, this sounds kind of like, okay, bring outdoor possessions inside or tie down securely. There are more claims for debris in a flood or wind event than there are for many other events or many other types of claims in these medium to small size floods, right? In Scituate, there was a property that I attended to right after one of the big storms in the spring, and the deck on the coastal property was gone. I mean, it wasn't even, the pilings weren't even there. But what was interesting is the wave, remember I said after it hits the wall, a sheet flows down behind the houses, and carried that debris with it. Now, it avoided any major damage, but it had very narrowly missed the foundation wall of a house about 6 rows back. That would have been a major issue. Now, is there anything you can do about tying down a deck when you've got waves that are 30 or 40 feet tall coming over the seawall? That's a little tough. But things like grills, propane tanks, you know, anything you think or don't think can float away or move, tie it down and bring it inside. I should have included some pictures because I get some great pictures of that type of stuff. If you're going to a shelter, make arrangements. Pets, you know, I'm not going to go through all this. Dave talked about this. Obviously, don't bring any alcohol or weapons to the shelter, although you might feel that you need the alcohol when you're there. Protect people from hazards. So if there is an emergency, you should be notified, like we said, by the code red, call that the reverse 911, notification on your television or radio, notification online by town, local news sites. Again, our local media, by local I mean Boston Metro, South Shore, Cape, North Shore, they've really been good the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years about getting stories and notifications out right away about these events. Okay, we all know where that sign is, right? That's going down to the Esplanade in Grant Rock. And how many people do we see after these signs are put out where their car is nose down into a pothole and there's a wave coming over it in the middle of the storm? Emergency information and instructions are given to you, and then listen to them. You know, I don't think anyone here would do that. I hope not. But if they say don't go down a road, then don't go down the road. You know, the car is going to get washed away. And the hazards that you don't think exist, which may not exist now, will exist as the storm continues on. Remember, these storms, our geography does not stay static. These things move, right? When the waves come, they rip land away. When the flooding happens, they move rocks. I remember watching in the March storm, standing on a deck, looking down at sheet flow, the water flowing under a house and moving a boulder about the size of this thing right here, just moving it right across the road, like the boulder was crawling. It's pretty crazy. Make a list of emergency numbers, and then we have a Red Cross website, obviously. A lot of the information from here actually came from the Red Cross and not FEMA, so a lot of this is really good info. So this picture was taken by me at Marshfield after the storms. What's really interesting is we don't think as individuals living in town that we can directly affect or protect our coastal infrastructure, but we can. So it's critical to protecting our community. I mean, all you have to see is whenever there's a breach and how much more water, even a cap that's blown off the seawall, how much more water enters our town. So you can help continue to protect our infrastructure, right? It doesn't take a bulldozer and town funds to actually make a difference. If you see drainage that's clogged, call the DPW. So why is that so important? Because the forces of water behind a seawall can cause just as much damage as the forces of water in front of that seawall. If you live near on a seawall, call the DPW if you see cracks. If we have a rotted trim board on our house, we don't wait till the board's fallen off to fix it. We see a little bit of it, we patch it up. That's the same idea with seawalls. And then prior to any storm, this goes to what we said earlier about photographs. Prior to the storms, take photographs of your property for documentation of pre-storm conditions. This is big because when the town goes for that public assistance, FEMA is asking for proof of pre-damaged conditions. Now, and again, the town, it's not that the town can't go out and photograph the whole seawall. I think the town of Scituate at one point, or Marshfield, hired a drone to go and take photos of the entire coastline. But our coastline, I keep saying this, it's not a static object, right? The seawall is fixed, it's damaged, it's fixed, it's damaged. So take those photos. Usually, we have a little bit easier of a predictable storm cycle up here because we're not getting a hurricane, or maybe not getting a hurricane. How many people here think we're going to get a nor'easter this winter? We're getting a nor'easter. Everyone's saying it should be up. We are getting a nor'easter this winter. It's not even a question. So that is something where we are able to at least preempt some of that. And then avoid putting hard or concrete patios or structures up against the seawall. What does that do? The patio or concrete structure sits on top. The sand scours out from below. We don't know if there's damage going on. You get a big event, and now that patio, while it might look like it's concrete and solid, it's lifted up. I've seen houses off their foundations by the debris because of the patio that came loose in front of their house and between the seawall. Avoid bolting structures directly to the seawall. I don't even think that's allowed anymore. These all help to keep everybody safe. It avoids debris, it avoids damage. So consider also buying flood insurance. That we throw that in pretty much everywhere. All right, so now the second part of my presentation is going to transition into the last part. Everyone heard last just then and their ears perked up. Okay. Great. Okay. So, now we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty. You've just had... Oh, what is that? Hold on a second. Keep the internet here. I'm going to shut this off so that doesn't happen again. Just 1 minute. Okay. Okay. You've had an event. You have flood insurance. Now what do you do? How many people in here have flood insurance? Okay, good. So I'm speaking to a good amount of the audience. And if you don't have flood insurance, you should probably have some type of flood insurance. Now, when I used to say flood insurance, I got the biggest eye roll ever. It's like, oh, you're defending a federal program that's so far in debt and it doesn't do anything for us. I've heard many conversations like that. Well, what I'll tell you is that what's interesting is not only is the federal program getting better, yes, it's actually trying to get better, it is actually a pretty good program as is, considering the difficulty of insuring against flood, when we think about how we do that. Private programs are now coming in. Now, regardless, a lot of what we're going to go over here is regardless of whether you have a private flood policy or an NFIP or federal flood policy. Anyone here have a private flood insurance policy? Oh, very interesting. Okay. I should ask that question more and see over time how many more hands go up. All right, so claims. Now, what's interesting is claims, with private flood insurance, their claims are not handled the same way as the NFIP in terms of loss history. If one private program has a loss history, I actually was dealing with this today. As many of you know, my full-time job is I run the flood insurance department for Rogers and Gray Insurance, and one of the interesting things is just today we were dealing with one flood company said, no, we actually used to private flood. We used to insure this complex. There were 10 buildings with claims. And I went to another company to get a policy, and they said, yeah, sure, we'll write this. No communication at all between the private companies on loss history, all right? And that's where there's a big disconnect currently in the entire industry. I don't blame that on anyone. It's just a disconnect within the entire industry. So this part is going to pertain just to the federal flood insurance. So you're going to be a repetitive loss if you've had 2 paid losses of more than $1,000 in any 10-year period since 1978. Now what's interesting is being a repetitive loss has 0 impact on your flood insurance premium. It does have an impact on your ability to apply for grants, because the more losses you have, the more likely their town will put you into their grant application. We're going to talk about grants a little later, towards the end of the program. However, if you become a severe repetitive loss, now you've got premium implications. There's a lot of words up there, and I don't expect everyone to read and understand every part of this. What I think the important thing are the 2 bullets at the bottom of this page, right? If you meet the definition of a severe repetitive loss, which is what's in bold there, it's 4 or more claims of $5,000, 2 within a 10-year period. The important thing is this is tracked all the way back to 1978 per structure. Now, when we talk about homeowners insurance, the loss history is based on you as the homeowner. When we talk about flood insurance, the loss history is based on the building. So what's interesting is I've had several cases where somebody assumes a policy, it was a repetitive loss, because again, remember, repetitive losses, the policy won't look any different, there won't be any numbers that change on the policy number, anything like that. And they take the policy over, and it was never disclosed to them that the building has had a flood loss history. And then the building has 2 more losses because, hey, I've still got some room to make some claims. Now it's a severe repetitive loss. Now, if you are an older structure, right? We saw an older structure, pre-1977 in most towns on the South Shore. Then there's huge premium implications, and that's what the second bullet is. So these older structures that are 1 to 4 families will see 25% increases in their flood insurance if they become a severe repetitive loss. So I bring that up because you need to know your building's loss history, and only the current owner of that building can get that loss history. So if you don't know your own individual loss history, just simply either you call FEMA or you go to your insurance agent, they can get a hold of FEMA and say, hey, we want a loss run on our building. They can do that because you're the owner of the building. Now what are you going to do if you go buy a building and that person refuses to give you a loss history? Are you going to buy that building? Probably not, because they may be a severe repetitive loss, or they might be on the cusp of being a severe repetitive loss. So that's really important. So that's why we bring up claims and loss history. All right, dwelling form. Yep, this is the cover. Oh, one last thing. FEMA is implementing on April 1st program changes we talk about at the end, but I might as well mention it now since we're here. If you're a severe repetitive loss, there will be an additional 5% premium owed on all severe repetitive loss buildings, whether you're newer or whether you're older. So there'll be a 5% increase on all those policies going forward. Yes?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
The dates you mentioned include the blizzard of 78?
Yes. Yes, I believe. So yes, because I believe the loss history started 1/1 of 78. Eric, do you know the difference? Do you know if that's correct? It's in the flood manual. Right. Yes, it's 1/1.
Quick question on that, too. They had some damage in 78, but you didn't claim it. Does that still count as a loss?
No, it has to be a filed and paid claim. And this is the other thing too, and I'm glad you brought this up. If you, I had a condo association come to me one time. I think about big condo associations, and they said, oh, I did a presentation like this to a bunch of association property managers, and they said, we had a flood, caused about $60,000 in damage, but we didn't file a claim because we didn't think it was an official flood by FEMA. Well, FEMA doesn't designate the flood. If it meets the federal definition of a flood, and the adjuster, you call for a claim, and the adjuster comes out and he says, yeah, this is a flood, then it's a flood. FEMA's not going to send out a declaration that there's an official flood in your community. So, you don't ever want to become a severe repetitive loss, but if you do have enough damage and you think you don't know whether you have a loss or not, having the adjuster come to your home costs you nothing and has no penalty on your premium. It will only be a penalty if that is a paid loss. So just keep that in mind. Dwelling form, here are some coverages. All right, we're going to read them all together. No, we're not really. There's a lot here. So this is not the important part. This is in here so that when you download the presentation later online, you'll have all the data. What's really important is the limitations in coverage. It's easier to talk about those. So in a basement, is this the basement? Okay, yeah, so we'll use this slide. In a basement, there are 17 items on your building coverage, right? Because remember, building and contents are split. So you have building coverage, you have contents coverage. There's 17 items for building coverage. Those things include your foundation wall, your drywall, your insulation, your sump pumps, your furnaces, right? Your hot water heaters. Now there are only 3 items on the right side of that. There are only 3 items that are covered for contents. Those items are washers and dryers. That's probably the only time I've ever seen a contents claim paid out in a basement is for a washer and a dryer. Why? Because the only other 2 items that are covered are a window air conditioner in its functioning position and plugged in. How many people have air conditioning units in the windows of their basement? Yeah, I didn't think so. and food freezers and the food in them, but not a fridge and a freezer. So how many people have large food freezers in their basement with food inside of them? I didn't think so. So this is really not something I've seen a lot of claims come from. You do, though, have substantial building coverage. I mean, think about how many furnaces or water heaters are in a basement, even though I encourage people to get them out of those areas. Now, no coverage ever. This is really where we want to focus in, because I get these questions all the time. How many people think seepage? I should have played the game. When I do these presentations to companies and real estate offices, I play a coverage game, right? Is it covered? So one of the questions we do is, you have seepage that comes into your basement from the outside, or you have sewer backup. Is that covered under a flood policy? No. Trick question. If the result is because of a flood, then yes. So you have to have the flood condition in order to have that be a claim. So I'm not going to go through all these. But the most important part, again, is highlighted at the bottom here, which is cleanup and debris removal is covered. Why is this important? What did we talk about earlier? In these small to medium-sized events, which really, if you look at the whole country, that's what our nor'easters end up being, these small to medium-sized events. Most of the damage is done by debris traveling in the water, but that's covered, removing it is, and cleanup. And cleanup is covered everywhere. I was with an adjuster doing a ride-along earlier this year in our March storms, and we came up to a small ranch house with a finished basement. Remember, there are limited coverages there, drywall, heating systems, and whatnot. And there's cleanup coverage. 2 inches of water in the basement, carpet, drywall, fine. Carpet's not covered, but the drywall is. But the cleanup costs $15,000 alone, because they're scrubbing the inside of the foundation, the outside of the foundation. They got the walls open. They're airing things out. Think about the cost that that is. They dry the carpets out. That's all covered. So remember, cleanup is covered. So when you got a claim, what is the first thing you do in the immediate aftermath of a claim? What's the first thing? Anyone know what to do? Right? There's a flood. Oh my God! I've got all this stuff all over the place. What do you do?
Take a picture.
Yes. Man, wow, everyone here is really good. I must have done a few of these to you guys before. The first thing you do is you really should do 2 things. You call the adjuster and you take your pictures. Because like I said earlier, I was with an adjuster earlier this year and the guy had replaced all his electric baseboard. Well, the adjuster goes, well, did you take pictures? No. Do you have receipts? No. I mean, I have to give you a standard, there's a standard price now that we give you for those items. So that's very important. So the damage occurs, you file a claim with your agent, the adjuster does something called scope the loss. So they will come out, expect about a week or a week and a half, depending on the size of the event, for them to come out. An advance claim might be filed. Claims of north of $20,000 usually get a 30% upfront payment. Right on the spot, about a week after. So while your full claim might take 6 to 10 weeks to pay, you get that 30% right about a week after. The adjuster sends the estimated proof of loss, and the proof of loss, technically it doesn't have to be signed within 60 days. The 60-day proof of loss deadline is really to make sure people are filing the claim in a timely manner, not getting paid in a timely manner, right? We had a few people that I ran into that had second homes, not around here, in my travels with the adjusters earlier this year. And they were going to homes where people weren't responding to, they had asked for an adjuster to come out, we couldn't get into the house, or the adjuster the person, the insured, wasn't there to let the adjuster in. Well, if they don't file that claim again, they call that closed with no file. I believe that's the official word, because they're not filing anything. So that person has to have an adjuster come back out there within that 60-day window to try to, and then it's up to the discretion of the examiner on whether they want to extend the 60 days if you didn't file it in a timely manner. Increased cost of compliance. We do have handouts over here on ICC. I don't know if I put them out. If they're not out, I will put them out. We have them. It's a $30,000 amount that is built into almost every flood policy. Anyone here live in a condo and have a flood policy? Okay, everyone here has ICC then. Except if you have a contents-only policy. ICC can only be used for elevating, demolishing, moving, or floodproofing, which won't apply to anybody in here. The structure. ICC cannot exceed the maximum policy value of $250,000, and it can only be used for flood damage. So what is ICC? I keep saying there's this number. So ICC, it's built in, it's $30,000. It is a, you can only get it though if your building has been substantially damaged. Now let's say everyone's going, okay, now what is substantial damage? Well, we're going to get to that. So here's the ICC claims process. It's pretty much an added-on process to your normal claim. Now let's talk about substantial damage, substantial improvement. And Eric, if we have Eric Carlson in the back of the room, he is the Assistant Director of the Floodplain Management Program. Did I get that right, Eric, this time? Close enough? Okay, all right. I always watch his Eric's title. Here for the state of Massachusetts. So this substantial improvement, substantial damage piece is really where Eric starts to get his hands dirty when it comes to the flood program. So we're going to go over this, and Eric, please feel free to stand up and correct me, because I know here I'll probably get some of the stuff too vague for people to understand. So substantial improvement, substantial damage are essentially the same, because when you're substantially damaged to repair, you're now substantially improved. So it basically, substantial improvement is if you exceed 50% of the market value of the structure in improvements. So what is substantial damage? If you exceed 50% of the pre-damage value of the building in damage. So you've got the improvement and you've got the damage. So who makes substantial damage determinations? Is it FEMA? No. Is it your insurance adjuster? No. If you're standing and you're looking at your house and the walls are blown in and the roof is collapsed, your deck is missing, who's making that determination that that building is substantially damaged? The adjuster will supply information to you and the community to make the determination, but it is your building official in your town that makes that determination. Okay? So, only the community official can issue an SI or SD determination. This can drastically change your standing in the NFIP, because you have to, once you become substantially damaged, now you have to abide by the current flood regulations to bring that house up to compliance. So while the definition uses market value, remember we said pre-market value, some towns used assessed value, Some towns used assessed with an escalator to get to a replacement or a market value. Eric, have you seen any other methods, or are those the basic three?
Most communities will use assessed value at least as a starting point,
Yeah.
and maybe they'll use appraised value if somebody wants to challenge
Yep.
their determination.
And so that's a great point, because the bottom bullet here is if a designation is made by anything other than an appraisal, or even if it's made by an appraisal, you can get your own independent appraisal to challenge that determination or that designation.
So just a point about appraised value versus assessed value.
Sure.
So assessed value, we all know that's what they base our taxes on. But from a real estate and a market value point of view, your assessed value is generally based on market values from 2 years ago.
Okay.
So in a rapid, and that's because they have a year to gather the information.
Sure.
And they're basing it on the previous year's values. So it's just the way it is. So in a rapidly increasing market, like we had back in the early 2000s, where
Sure.
things were going up 18%, don't rely on your assessed value, always ask for an appraised value.
That's a great point. You typically want to, if you do want to, some people want to be substantially damaged because it gives them access to ICC. That's the only way you can get it. But some people don't want to be substantially damaged. And that way you can go and get your independent appraisal. I'm usually not about trying to game things, but I mean, that is the process and that's how you can do it, yes.
Joe, you made an interesting comment a couple minutes ago about who determines the damage.
That's right.
And you said town official.
Yes, yes.
Does that really work, or do the insurance companies just hire more and more lawyers to try and prove him or her wrong?
No, actually, well, so it's interesting. So the substantial damage designation doesn't necessarily tie to insurance except for the ICC. So when we're talking, and this is kind of where that's why the adjuster technically doesn't make the designation, because you're separating the insurance. The reason that the community official has to do it is because you're now moving away from insurance and you have to comply with building regulations. And so we're moving away from insurance. So yeah, the insurance company really doesn't have a stake when it comes to SI or SD. Great question though, very good question. Okay, we're gonna keep going here. I'm almost done. So, okay, so we're into the two of the final parts of the program. So I'm going to talk about funding, and we're right on time. Okay, so I'm 2 minutes behind, but we're just about right on time. So I'm going to talk here briefly about grants. We heard about what the town is doing here in Scituate earlier from Kyle and Brad about grants. I'm going to talk about it generically so that if you're not from Scituate, you at least know what direction to move yourself in. And then we're going to have Megan Coleman come up and talk about lending options, which are not part of the federal grant program, but in some cases all you'll have is lending if you can't get a grant or don't have flood insurance, or flood insurance, enough flood insurance. So there's really two grant programs that are going to be applicable for most individuals. And that is the FMA, Federal Mitigation Assistance, and the HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. And this is wrong. This should say right here, communities have to apply for both. So individuals can apply as sub-applicants to the community, but the community has to apply. And we want to thank Dave Woodbury from MEMA. He was going to try to make it tonight. He lives in Worcester. What's happening in Worcester tonight? About a foot more snow than we're going to get. So he was unable to make it, but he's the grant master when it comes to the state of Massachusetts. So he's a great resource with MEMA. And Eric, do you want to talk about grants? You're going to sit grants out? You're good? Okay. All right, great. So I'll talk about grants as best as I can when it comes to how it applies to you. With federal mitigation assistance, the community, like I said, they must apply. You will apply to the town must agree to apply to the state or to the feds. Congress appropriates a certain amount of money each year for this program. I believe we had 150 million, Kyle, do you know the exact number? It's about that, 150 million. I have 2017's grant appropriations on the table, but I think underneath it or on top, there's mixed in 2018's appropriations. It's relatively similar. There was more money this year, though. Application period is only about 2 months. That's not the case. it's technically longer. It's the deadlines established by the localities or the state can be shorter, so it's really about 4 months. Requires some upfront costs. You've got to have the plans ready to go. When the announcement came in August that we were going to be entering the FMA program, if you did not have your plans and designs ready to go, you're already looking at 2019. Work is paid in installments. 90 to 100% though is reimbursed. How do you qualify for FMA? You have to be a severe repetitive loss or a repetitive loss. So that's where that becomes important. Now the definition, the loss history, can be different. Remember, repetitive loss doesn't mean anything for premiums, but now it does for grants. HMGP, that should say communities must apply. You're a sub-applicant to the community. It's only available after a presidential declaration. This year is one of the rare years where we have all three, we have technically 3 grant programs going on. We got the FMA, the PDM, which we didn't mention here, but we also get HMGP because the March storm was a public assistance declared disaster, meaning individuals couldn't get assistance, but the towns and communities could, and that triggered HMGP funding. Only available after a presidential declaration, available for more than individual mitigation, and it's only a 75% reimbursement. So you'd actually need to have 25% cost coming out of your pocket. Interesting though is ICC, that $30,000, can be used as your contribution. So if you've got a major loss, you can get ICC and you get an HMGP grant, you might actually be able to cover it 100%. And with that, we're going to you know what, let's have Megan Coleman come up. She's going to talk about the 203K loan program. We have information on the back there. Megan has information on her table on the back. Really the 203K loan program, Megan will talk more about it, is a...
Fannie Mae and the Homestead program.
Okay, so there are 2 others, yeah, and Megan's going to talk all about that, but these lending programs have become increasingly popular because after disasters, or before disasters really, people don't know where else to go because the grants, I mean, we talk about these grant programs, they're 3 years at a minimum to get implemented. So Megan?
Hi.
All you.
Thank you.
Are you good? Okay.
I'm the loudest person in the room. I don't need to speak to mic. Hi, I'm Megan Coleman. I'm a Scituate resident. I've lived here since 1997. I've had the pleasure, I am not a townie, but my 3 children are. And I've had the pleasure of being a realtor for 13 years in Scituate before I got into the mortgage side. So I've seen all sides. I've probably driven on every single street. I've probably seen all of your houses. Maybe not the inside, but definitely the outside. I love living here. Would never go anywhere else. My whole family's in Seattle. I'm like, nope, I'm staying in Scituate. So there are a couple of, I've been with Movement Mortgage for about, I'm coming on my 3rd year now. Movement does things a little bit differently, but that's not what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. There are options available to you. I'm gonna, just for tonight's presentation, assume that you guys all own homes in Scituate. I think that's fair to say. You may own a home that needs some renovation work, or you've met with Joe and you realize that you, maybe with just a little bit of work, you can get your house raised or do some work to your yard and change your flood insurance cost exposure. That's what we're here for. The 203K program is a FHA loan. The Homestead loan is through Fannie Mae. They have slightly different benefits, slightly different program requirements. It's the type of thing where we sit down and we go over and figure out what's going to work best for you and your individual needs. Generally what happens is we will take your mortgage, we'll refinance you for what you currently owe, and then we can add on the cost of the renovation. So for example, Joe referred a client to me, they actually live in Marshfield, but they're down in the Hummerock area, and just as they finished putting in the carpet from the January storms of their multi-level home, they got whomped with the March storms. So they talked to Joe, Joe referred them to me, they've had a design come out and they're taking their multi-level home, You walk in on this floor, you can walk down to the lower level here, walk up over here. This got flooded out twice. They're taking this and ripping it out and making it into a carport. And then they're adding, so they're gonna walk in here, then you have this, and they're adding a third story over here. They're in the process of getting bids in, but then we are lending them the money to go ahead and do that. So it doesn't cost that much more out of pocket to do it. You do have to qualify for the higher price. When you come in, it's a great option for people who are coming in and, maybe you've had some storm damage in the past that wasn't taken care of by your insurance claims before. It's an easy way to come in, refinance, add that on top. We come in, we actually have a fabulous renovation department where we come in, we actually have the contractor that you choose. They have to come through us. We act as the bad guy. We come in and we will issue them draws. We go out and send out inspectors to make sure that the work is being done to your satisfaction and ours, and make sure that everything is going as you want it to go. Does anybody have any questions? It's pretty straightforward, but it's not something that everybody is aware of. So I'm here, my information is here. I have an office in Braintree, I have an office in Waltham, but I'm generally down the street on Briarwood Lane. So if anybody has any questions.
I'll just say coincidentally, I got a 203K loan in Weymouth, and it worked out incredibly for me. If anybody's interested in learning about the process, it actually worked out. It
works out really well. If you have friends or family who are thinking about moving to Scituate and they're a little bit nervous about buying near the water, or there are incredible options out there.
How is it different than a standard refinancing the mortgage and then, taking out
a home equity line?
Yeah.
Well, the home equity line.
Not a home equity line, actually refinancing and then taking some equity out.
Cash out refi.
So a cash out refi? It's a little bit different in that you're financing, because not everybody has equity in their house that they're able to take out.
So the different loan to value calculation?
Yeah, because what we actually do, so for example, this house that I'm describing down in Marshfield, and I'm just winging it because I didn't look it up, but say that the home value as it is right now is $450,000, and that includes your, $4,000 or $5,000 flood insurance cost. So right now, so then we take it and we're going to mitigate that. They're taking the opportunity to go ahead and expand out the back and add some square footage. They're going to redo their kitchen, and they're adding a whole third floor. So all of a sudden, we, with our appraisers, go in and look at the plans, and they say, okay, we think that after renovation value is going to go from $500,000 to $600,000. So we're going to go ahead and do that. The renovation is only going to cost $75,000. You know I didn't do my homework now. But take that. So you're borrowing your old mortgage plus the $75,000 to do it. We're already adding value in. So it's like when you see on Property Brothers and they go, okay, you've done this great renovation, you bought the house at $450, it's now worth $650, but you only added in $100,000 worth of work. So we're making sure that's part of our vetting process, is that the work that you're planning on doing, the money that you're planning on spending, is going to end out giving you the value that you need at the end of the mortgage. So it works really well for people who are buying or refinancing and don't have the equity in their house right now to take it out and use it.
And that can be used for elevating houses as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. FHA has more restrictions than the home style loan, but that's why I'm so happy that we offer both. Interestingly, having been a resident in Scituate that had a whole neighborhood's worth of septic fields blow up 3 years after we moved in, thank you, Mr. Developer. The home style loan actually helps take care of septic systems too. So you can take care of that before or after you buy a house. Yeah.
Your home's paid for, but you could still, if you want to elevate it and do renovations and make changes and things
Yep.
like that, you could still qualify.
Absolutely. Just because your home is paid for doesn't mean you can't take out a mortgage. So you wouldn't be refinancing the mortgage, you'd actually be mortgaging your home. So you'd be creating debt again, but you have the value already there. And so it depends on what your situation is to qualify. Anybody else? Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So we're into the last part of the program, and Doris on the back, we're going to do a little transition here. I'm going to ask our expert panel to come to the front of the room if they want to. I know we have a nice intimate group here that we don't necessarily have to do this at the front of the room, but we have some experts in the room tonight, and a real big piece of these outreaches is we gave you a lot of generic info to take it away, and go home and get some information and digest. Now we want to start to answer some more detailed questions. Not necessarily about your individual property, but more specific than just the generalized info. So I'm going to ask, we have Nate Dill in the room. He's on our board of directors. He's actually our coastal scientist. So Nate, if you want to come on down. Megan Coleman, who just spoke on 203Ks and other loan programs. Eric Carlson in the back of the room. You can stay there, come down front. Eric, come on down front. Be careful of all the wires and stuff. I'm going to keep the mic over here and just reiterate the questions. And everyone, I think, can speak loud enough. And there's one seat left. Who wants it? Come on, who wants it? Kyle, why don't you come down front? And we'll have Tim. We have some other experts in the room. We'll have jump in. In the meantime, Doris, why don't you stand up? And Doris wanted to talk a little bit about preventing losses because Doris knows a little bit about losses when it comes to floodplains.
Had my first one in 1978, and I had my last one January of this year. I have multiple properties, therefore I've had multiple losses because they're all in the floodplain. What I wanted to say, and I think it's really important, that you all be loss smart. Joe did an excellent job of explaining repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss. He explained to you that decks aren't covered. If you have a loss and it's your deck got damaged, and depending on what your deductible is, for me, my deductible is $2,500. So it's my deck and some other minor thing that may not even add up to the full $2,500. I am not reporting that to the NFIP and having an adjuster come out and document that they're not going to pay me. All right, don't do that. And even if it was over, let's say I was going to get $500 out of it, in my case, I wouldn't bother because I don't want to end up as a severe repetitive loss, which I had one property that got into that. It's now been taken care of under one of the grant programs, and it is absolutely been a survivor. So I recommend that you be really smart about your loss area and not put in, it's kind of like your car. You don't put in when somebody else whacks their door into your car and puts a ding in it, a little bit of this or a little bit of that. You put in when you have an accident. So you want to put in when you have a true loss on your property and one that's worth collecting on.
Thank you, Doris. Doris will be around for our general discussion in about 15 minutes when we're done with the official program. So let me just read off who's in front of you here in the room. If we don't have questions from the audience, I have a few I want to put out there and get some responses from those experts here today. We have at the far end, Nate Dill. He is our coastal scientist. He sits on the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition's board of directors, works for Ransom Consulting. So he is going to answer all of our mapping questions. Next to him, we just heard from Megan Coleman from Movement Mortgage. Next to Megan is Eric Carlson from DCR and the State's Floodplain Management Program. And once again, I botched that title. And next to Eric is Kyle Boyd from the town of Scituate. So we've got the experts here to answer your questions. Let's go. We got some questions in the front. We'll go front to back. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes doing this, and we want to spend some time after this, so the last 10 minutes or so, to have some free conversation in an informal way amongst all of us here. So, question in the front, yes, and I'll reiterate the questions and speak up the answers if you can't hear the front.
So I read in the there was a $4 million grant, I think, for the seawall, the one that's very crumbly. Could someone maybe that's for you, Kyle, like what exactly was approved, how long will it take?
So the question was, there is a $4 million.
What stretch specifically?
What stretch is going to be done by the money that Scituate received for seawall?
I think it was just approved, like.
Just approved.
Oh, 2 nights ago. So you're talking about Oceanside?
I don't know.
I believe there's a span on Oceanside, and I
I
apologize.
think it was actually the work with Cedar Point.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, sorry, I started a month ago, so I'm still familiarizing with the whole town and all the structures and everything like that. But I can visualize it. There's a gap somewhere out in Cedar Point. I think you're referring to the $4 million with the Army Corps.
I believe there's.
No, it's for engineering,
Oh, so the initial stages?
engineering and permitting, if we get the federal money
Yeah.
from FEMA.
So the town paid $4 million, and then that goes towards the planning, or how?
The
I
plan.
would just love to know how it works.
So to be honest, I'm not sure specifically, but I have a list of all the grant funding that's been approved to date.
Okay.
So that might help, but there's a lot of grant funding. As far as the most recent one, I believe it's Oceanside, along near Cedar Point.
Yes.
How has the NFIP program moved itself back towards solvency again? And what's changed, what's different?
So anyone up in the front want to take that? That's a big one. I can address it. Anyone? The question is, how has the National Flood Insurance Program moved itself closer to being solvent? Anyone want to answer that? I
Lots
can.
of refi loans? No.
No. All right. Well, I can give you a couple examples. In front of you here, I put up the program changes for April 1st, so you can see some of the premium increases which are happening on April 1st of 20, that should say 19. Those were the changes announced, I'm sorry, those were the changes that happened April 1st. We have updated numbers that are actually pretty similar to that. The average flood insurance policy is increasing by 8% next year on April 1st of 2019. So this has been a big deal. What is the National Flood Insurance Program going to do to bring itself back into a place where it's not $20 billion in debt? Well, the first thing that's most likely, we have an expiration I mentioned earlier. We have a big deadline, November 30th. The program has to be extended. National politics takes a big role in what happens next. We're going to most likely get a 6-month kick down the road of the current program, but there is a lot of talk about what happens next after that now that we have some sort of settled House and Senate, because the Senate, even though it was controlled by one party, by the same party as the House, disagreed with the House on every type of flood reform that was being pushed through for various reasons we don't have time to get into tonight. I bring that all up because now the flood reforms that will be moving forward in the spring, hopefully, or into the summer, will address true solvency issues. Those are things like not writing buildings that receive multiple losses after so many times, and forcing them to go into some type of private program outside of the NFIP. Doing things such as getting some structures that aren't actuarial finally to actuarial rates, and possibly having a place in the private industry to move those higher risk and lower rate buildings. So there are definitely things on the horizon. I will tell you that one of the biggest things that was done by the current FEMA administration, which is different than the other elected administrations, they purchased what's called reinsurance for the first time ever 2 years in a row. What that does is it actually cost the program $200 million, but it secured an extra $1 billion of private funding to pay out claims if there was a disaster of $8 billion or more. Well, in every year since they've purchased reinsurance, they have been paid that full $1 billion. So that saved the program $800 million in claims. So those are the types of things where the program is working to bring itself to solvency. Not going to happen overnight, but the program is not just sitting on its laurels and hoping that it brings in enough premium to finally get to that point. Yes, question? And we'll go over here.
Joe, I don't know if this is the time to talk about, maybe even just a couple of minutes, but you and I have talked many times about this issue of people dropping NFIP insurance, going to the private market, and then the problems of getting back into.
Sure.
NFIP?
So the problem is leaving the National Flood Program, if you're currently in the National Flood Insurance Program, leaving it for a private flood policy and then trying to get back into the federal program. You know, this is one of those reforms, we were just talking about solvency. Another big reform is making it so that private flood insurance and national flood insurance will actually work together, because right now they don't. Now, there was one of the changes, I think I have it here, October 1st of this year. One of the biggest changes was cancellation code 26, which allows you to leave the federal flood program for a private policy midterm. But just because you can, doesn't mean you should. The problem is if there is a lender involved on your property, or if you're grandfathered, and you leave the federal program and then later have a loss and you're kicked out of a private program and you try to get back into the federal program, you lose your grandfather and you lose your low rates. So what we suggest is if you're an older building and there's a lender involved, because that's the only penalty is if there is a lender involved, that's a FEMA rule, not a lender rule, or if you're grandfathered, simply reduce your current policy to about $1,000 in coverage and then purchase the private policy to basically be a excess above $1,000 in coverage, which would just be a primary flood policy, so that you can keep that NFIP policy turning in the background. Not necessary for everyone, but there are instances, but the bottom line, what Dave's trying to get across is, don't just jump ship from the NFIP because it looks good. You know, make sure you have that conversation before you do that. Does anyone else up here want to add anything to that? Okay. All right, we have another question. We go gentleman and then the woman in the white shirt there. Yes, gentleman.
Mine is also a seawall question. Who determines what section of the seawall gets repaired? How long does this process take? And if you petitioned over the years for your seawall or your area, your neighborhood seawall to be done, when will we find out about something like that?
So I would say in 2016, there was a comprehensive report done. It's the one that Brad was saying he had a hard time pronouncing. I think it's Coastal Erosion Sediment Transport Prioritization Management Plan.
Say that 10 times fast.
So it was I think like $260,000 done by Applied Coastal for each section. They broke the whole town up into sections and came up with basically recommendations, detailed recommendations for each section of town, and then prioritized the most important sections in terms of severity. So there's different factors, cost, emergency, basically everything. And there's a table that, in that plan, that ranks the areas in town, infrastructure-wise. So that's what I operate off of, and that's just basically after a month of being here and kind of understanding everything. Then, so there's all these different recommendations. I would say we turn to that report for the recommendations, because that's the most comprehensive report we have.
What are the priorities?
Oceanside is the first, but as far as further than that, it's in my office. I cut it out. I apologize. What was the question?
My question was, how do you determine which neighborhood or which section?
So then based off of this prioritization, different projects fall into different potential grants. So whenever there's a grant available, we're applying. Basically, is what I've observed. So if there's a grant available, the town of Scituate is going to apply, and we would just run down that list. Whatever we can plug in, we'll plug it in. Brad talked about how we just got a grant back, and it seems like the town has done a great job in the past of really just getting a lot of grants. I think we could improve on making it easier for the residents to understand what we are getting and where it's being improved, but that's something we hope to work on. The plan, what I was trying to say earlier too, is that plan is extremely comprehensive, and it's hard for me to just say in a couple words, this is what the plan is, but it's a goal of the CAC to kind of digest all the different plans. There's other plans too, the hazard mitigation plan, building resilient Scituate plan, there's a sea level plan. We want to take all this information that's available to the town and make it just easier for, you know, people to understand quickly, you know, kind of what's going on.
Is that report perhaps in the library here? I can't pronounce it the way you
It's on our website, but, so if you go to
It's
the,
in that report you mentioned, though? That's what you're using?
yeah,
In that report, you'll see essentially the rankings.
There's some table in the appendix.
it does, it ranks different cities in town, and that's just personally what I, like, if somebody asked me, what would I think?
So that's what 2016,
Yeah.
they went around and did that.
And apply to coastal. to that.
So it might be a good resource, absolutely. We
Yeah.
do it and make sure it's.
And then on top of that, regularly, so I just joined Storm team in Massachusetts, so my job will be to go out in different areas and document the infrastructure before storms, like Joe was saying, how that's important, so that afterwards we can obtain grant funding if it gets damaged.
Thank you.
Yeah, question, yes.
I had a question about private insurance and the national flood. I was part of national flood. My agent changed me to Lloyd's of London, and now they're talking about moving me to National Flood Insurance Program out of Florida.
Oh, yes, that's a private program.
Is there a detriment to being out of state or even out of country?
No, in fact, there's maybe out of 150 private flood pieces of paper, right, the policies that exist, only about 40 of those are in the United States. So you're most likely going to be outside the United States. So the other program that your agent is talking about, the Flood Insurance Agency, which is based out of Florida, that's also, I think there's two programs that they have. One of them is out of the country. One of them might be a part of it, might be backed by U.S. carrier, but I think most of it's out of the country, a Lloyd's product basically, or one of their syndicates. So, yeah, so it's, again, there's not necessarily going to be a penalty for everybody that leaves the NFIP and tries to come back. You're not looking to come back to the NFIP, you're just moving private companies, which is fine.
I'm looking for what's better for me. I don't know if NFIP is better for me than.
And that's, so those types of detailed questions really need to be talked to. You know, and a knowledgeable agent in this field should be able to understand those types of things, especially if they have multiple private carriers that they're moving you between.
Because did you say earlier that there was a big problem that if we had a private insurer, that you couldn't do ICC or something?
Well, no, so that brings up a good point.
Because somebody told me that if I
Yeah.
go to London and something happens, it's $30,000 I can't access.
Well, Paul, that brings up a really good point. So we talked about ICC in the context of the National Flood Insurance Program. I only write with ICC private carriers that include ICC. Not all of them do. So you're going to have to, and again, there's 150 programs. You're going to want to make sure that the program you're in has an ICC provision.
Thank you very much.
All right, we got a question here and a question there, and then we'll take, so we got 3 questions and we'll wrap up questions. Sam in the back.
My question's for Nate. Where do you see the future of mapping? You know, FEMA's got maps out that seem to be heavy on the coastal, but we've seen more and more storms with the torrential rains that are flooding inland to places, and what technologies are out there that they're not.
So the flood insurance rate maps in most of Massachusetts, I think throughout most of New England, have been recently updated.
Correct.
And it seems like FEMA goes through sort of a 20 to 30 year cycle with those updates. So I wouldn't really expect to see any updates that are coming from, that are coming down from FEMA to the communities anytime in the next 20 to 30 years. That doesn't mean that communities can't make the updates to the maps themselves. The communities are able to submit information to FEMA and request that they apply that FEMA changes the maps. There's sort of competing levels of interest to doing that. On the one hand, the community wants to make sure the maps are as accurate as possible so that they're planning appropriately to mitigate the flood hazard. On the other hand, there's a lot of pressure from members of the community to have those maps not overestimate flood risk because of the impact on the cost of insurance premiums. And so, what we see though is that FEMA does tend to, when they produce new maps, they tend to paint the map with a pretty broad brush, and so you end up having some areas where the flood hazard is sort of overestimated, and other areas where it may be underestimated. People might see that, all of a sudden the base flood elevation went up 10 feet on their property. That might indicate that FEMA has now done something in their analysis that overestimated what the flood is. Or you might see that it's gone down. Maybe that's correct, maybe not. If you've seen it's gone down in a place where there's been 3 major floods in the last 10 years, then that's an indication that it may be wrong the other way. And so there's opportunities for private individuals and working through the community and also for the community itself to get those maps revised, on a property by property basis or a larger area. I think we could actually revise larger areas of the map instead of just one parcel, for example.
Can I ask you
Yes.
a follow-up? So that would include, clearly not just coastal stuff, but vernal pools, vernal streams, things like that flood in the spring or, after a heavy rain?
So FEMA's analysis, flood analysis, really focuses on sort of major water bodies. So the larger rivers and streams, some areas that might be known to pond water during a storm, they don't really contain methodologies that will assess whether an area is prone to flash flooding. They don't get down to the level of detail of stormwater infrastructure. So if you have a flood that's caused by a clogged storm drain, that is a flood, and I think that could certainly be covered. But the analysis that FEMA does to determine what the risk is on the map isn't going to consider what if this storm drain clogs, what if that storm drain clogs. They just kind of either assume there are no storm drains or assume they all work, depending on how it's done. And so that sort of, vernal pools, depending on how sort of small scale the area is, it's probably not representative on the FEMA map. It's a very small area.
I'm going to follow up to my follow-up and ask a really loaded question because I don't know the answer to it at all. So in Scituate, we have several areas that are under development or have been under development. For example, I lived on Pratt Road for a number of years and heard through the grapevine that people behind our development on Arbor Way had flooding issues after our development was done because it changed the level of the groundwater. Now we have the proving grounds being developed and things like that. And people who are downhill from that, what are their options in terms of protecting their house from potential issues in the future?
That's a good question. If it's a groundwater related issue, that's not something that the FEMA flood maps are really going to consider.
But that's something that flood insurance could cover?
Yeah, if it meets the definition of a flood, and I think this brings up a great point because while, and Eric, I don't know if you know of any protection that's allowed for, I don't know, like ground protection or anything like that.
Developments are supposed to be reviewed for those sorts of things during the permitting stage.
Okay.
It's not something that would affect, more than likely not something that would affect what the flood insurance rate map would look like.
Sure.
More of a runoff issue, stormwater management issue.
Sure.
And groundwater issue. I did want to mention, though, there is currently an update underway that does affect Scituate. It's a non-coastal update. So there are right now preliminary maps out that are available on FEMA's Map Service Center.
That's for, I think, all of Plymouth County?
No, actually there's a couple that affect the region. One is for the Cape Cod watershed.
Yep.
And one is for the Charles River watershed. The Cape Cod watershed has preliminary maps out right now. The Charles River watershed they have work maps out which aren't available online. The preliminary maps are not yet available.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. So to answer that, to address that question, yeah, if it is a defined flood, then which would be 2 parcels of land, one of them could be the street in front of your home, that is, has water that comes off of it onto it. So basically imagine not rain water that causes damage, but the rainwater causes the water to move around the ground and comes onto your property. You've got a defined flood, and that is a claim. So that's 2 good answers there to hopefully address that question, which is individual developments are supposed to take that into consideration. They won't necessarily show on the flood map, but they will also be insurable losses. We saw a lot of this, I'll call that like flash flooding, right, coming off of the property onto another. Everyone remember this summer when Lynn and Peabody saw those really bad flash floods? Well, it drove me nuts because people on TV were going, well, I have all this water in my basement and I have no coverage even if I had a flood insurance policy. We know that's not true. They would have had some coverage, furnace, washer, dryer, if they had the right coverage. That would have been a covered loss. So that brings up a good question.
I would just add to that too. We have documented more recently had rainfall events that have been more severe than they have been historically, and so this type of flash flooding that's happening seems to be happening more frequently, and it is just simply a result of the fact that you have a storm that dumps a lot more rain than some of the older information you might have looked at.
Kyle has a follow-up.
Yeah, I would just say, and if you are in a subdivision where you are having stormwater issues, it's not just a situation where it's already went through the permitting process, throw your hands up, there's nothing you can do. There's different green infrastructure solutions that you can implement, bioswales, rain gardens, different things that you can
Pervious surfaces.
different things you can do to improve your situation that would manage some of that stormwater. It depends how significant it is, and how significant would depend what type of stormwater infrastructure you would need, but there are solutions to stormwater depending on the space you have available.
We had a question over here, and then we'll jump over there. Yes.
I've had a couple of FEMA claims, and they've gone very well, but it does take a couple months to get the check, and then if you have a mortgage, the check is written to your mortgage company, and they have a ton of requirements. So what do people do? Like, I use my savings. I mean, I can't wait 3 months to fix getting into my house or a structural beam being broken.
You mean to reimburse from the lender to the contractor?
Well, I'm just saying, if you didn't have any savings,
so,
are there any programs that help you bridge?
No. What's interesting, our board of directors is a lender who usually talks exactly about this issue. There is typically lender depending. If the claim is small enough, they won't do that. If it's depending on the lender. In the situation where the lender, so what we're talking about is the check comes from the insurance company, from FEMA, but it's not made out to you, it's made out to your lender, and your lender is the first payee on that check because that's how the program works. So the lender will receive the check. In some cases, there will be a reimbursement program from your lender. So you've got to either make an agreement with the contractor, which doesn't always work, or you've got to upfront the costs, and the lender, once you prove the work was done, because they don't want you to take the money and run if they have a collateral issue. So what we've seen is a couple different things. Sometimes you can get either waivers or installments, so they'll actually give you a little bit of the money to get seated and then a little bit afterwards. Or if the lender is really being hardline, there is an issue there in savings. We have in the past had lenders who will actually loan the money and use the check as a reimbursement to the loan. That's another way to do it as well. So yes, that is definitely an issue. We do usually address that. I'm glad you brought that up because that is an issue. Did anyone up here want to address that issue? I don't know if anyone, Megan, maybe?
One of the things that part of the line items that we go through when we're qualifying for a renovation loan, whether it's a purchase or a refi, is whether you're going to be able to live in the property while you are doing the renovation. And I think it's up to 4 months that we will roll in your mortgage payment so that, we won't pay for you to stay at a hotel or, pay for you to stay at your sister's house, but we can roll in your mortgage payment so that it helps defray those costs.
All right, we've got 2 more questions, one over here and one over here. We're going to jump here and then back over there. Yes?
Hi, my question is about local politics more than some of the technical details here. I'm a resident of Housnack in Quincy. They have just recently announced some basic agreements to work on the seawall, established seawall, on the Quincy Bay side of Housnack. A fairly good stretch of distance. They'll be adding probably seawall cement blocks on top of the established seawall there. Maybe they'll be doing things to also slow down the amount of water that's getting through the granite subpiles and maybe put some of that fabric. They've done this on sections of the Quincy Bay side of the seawalls along here. I'm on the Weymouth Hingham Bay side of things, and my particular stretch of exposure is east, northeast. We got really a flood of water that went over the top of our seawall, and in the 30 years we've been there, it's the first time that that has happened. It also took away a couple of smaller piers, and it took away the set of stairs that we had from the seawall, down to the beach. So the question is, I'm kind of looking for advice or a name of, the kind of way that we should, approach it. There's only, let's say, 5 or maybe 18 or so houses that got damaged as much as I think, anybody did in the area with that water that came for, a couple of the tides during that March storm. And I'm not sure we have the kind of political weight, if you will, to kind of go up against the, people who are now, likely going to be having this kind of rehabilitation of the seawall done. But we need to have it done because it's taken away the dirt from our lower section of it.
So I'll throw that to the front of the room. At the end of the day, really what you're looking for is how can either the city of Quincy or the individuals within the city of Quincy get some type of funding, localized funding, to do some type of, you would call that a smaller coastal infrastructure project. It's 15 homes at the most, you said. Anyone at the front of the room want to throw out any resources?
I guess I'm not too familiar with what's available in the state, but I think there are potential opportunities for grant funding to do that kind of thing. I think first you really need to understand what the problem is or how severe the hazard is. So you mentioned the storm in March, there was a lot of water coming over. Was it actually the tide coming over the wall, or was it waves splashing water over the wall, or the combination of both?
Combination of both, and it's the first time in 30 years, that we had really anything but, a thin layer, come over. So this brought over lots of crap into the lower section behind the seawall, which, knocked things down and so on.
My understanding of that storm was that the water level in Boston was the highest that's ever been recorded there. And so it was from that perspective, was a very rare event. So you would have to do some kind of study and you would want to maybe seek grant money to do that. But you could do some kind of study to show what that risk is, what that hazard is, and then what the risk is. You could look at how much potential damage there is. You would kind of come up with a dollar amount. And then you can use that as sort of leverage to then go after more funding, to then look at, what are alternatives for the design of increasing the height of the seawall to reduce that cost of damage. I live in Massachusetts. For the last 4 years or so, I've been working in Maine, and so I can't understand what's available. I know that Maine has a program that's available for communities where they can apply for funding. They have a couple different grant programs where they can apply for funding.
Right. The local politicians have been working, really for some years now. I would say, the last 10, 12 years, working with one particular company, Ty and Bond, who are kind of specializing in advising the city on how to do the repairs and to what degree, how high they make that block. Addition, the height addition, but also whether to add the kind of plastic mat behind the seawall to stop the soils from the land side being drawn out into the the salt water. So there's really some expertise around, but now the competition for, like us with our smaller group of houses against, a longer stretch with maybe richer people there, is, I think, going to get us kind of pushed to the back of the bus.
I can understand.
Kyle, did you want to mention something? Sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I mean, I live down House Neck for a little bit, and I have a painting of that seawall in my dining room, but that's besides the point. I would say, I don't know if have you guys formed like an official group?
No, not with my neighbors.
That
We
might
had
be
some
a
casual
good start.
conversations, but, I'm not a politician.
Yeah, no, I would only say, sometimes it's easier, if you did formalize yourselves and form a group, then when you're talking to the politicians, it's like, they know it's this area, this group represents this area, this is who we're dealing with. It's not just an individual homeowner, not that shouldn't go away, but just sometimes strength in numbers might be a good first step, and then kind of, I don't know if you've reached out to the politicians, but first, maybe try that. If you haven't, you might be surprised at who you talk to, and they might be more helpful than you think.
Okay.
Are you aware of the state-run seawall and dam program, grant program?
No.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is offline, we'll talk. That's kind of what our Costa Coalition is about, is helping smaller groups like that formalize and get the information into your hands so that you can start to work on. Because a lot of the grants that the towns down here in the South Shore have gotten have actually come from low-interest loans from the state seawall and dam grant program. So that may very well be a good option for you. Yeah. Good. One last question over here, then we're going to wrap up. Yep. Yes.
Hurricane Florence did a tremendous amount of damage in North Carolina, and most of it was away from the coast.
Yeah.
Am I to, for years we talked about the riverine areas, bringing those property owners in to help build the solvency of the NFIP.
Sure.
But a lot of the damage in North Carolina was rain, torrential rain. Are those people eligible to participate in the NFIP?
Everyone is.
Everyone?
Everyone is, and I think, yeah, did someone of you, did you
I
raise
was
your
going to
hand?
say the same thing. When a community participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, all property owners in the community can buy a flood insurance policy
But the
through the
community
national.
has to participate.
The community,
Correct.
right, in Massachusetts, all but 10 communities participate in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Nationally, Eric, do you know that number nationally, right? Do you?
Nationally, I don't know. I know that
26,000 communities, 22,000 of them participate, so more than not. And there's only 5 reasons that somebody cannot purchase a federal policy. And if you know another one, Eric, tell me. Well, I'm going to try to name them off. Cobra Zone, 1316, 100% over water before 1982, or after 1982. No, after. More than 50% below grade, and I'm missing one.
Non-participating.
Non-participating community. And of course, fraud will void your policy at the time of loss, so there's that one.
Well, again, the state of North Carolina comes up with their own.
They do. North Carolina is a very interesting state, and that's another talk for another time. North Carolina is allowed through a technical partnership with FEMA to actually make their own maps. They're the only state in the country that's allowed to do that. All right, and with that, I'm going to put this up there for people. It's a resource for you. That's our website. That's my email. Our board members, Tim, Doris Crary, Tim Williams, Nate, Dill, and myself. Am I missing anyone? My board, Dave Ball, all the speakers up front, and everybody that came. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.